Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James and welcome back to our Unity 3D platformer tutorial series. Now in the last episode we set up our system to make our player run into something, die, and then respawn back where they started. But what we want to do next is set up a situation so that we can have our player respawn at different checkpoints within our world. So the way we'll do that is, first of all, we'll obviously need an item that we can use as a checkpoint, and we're just going to use something very basic and placeholdery. We're just going to go create a new game object and 3D object, and we're going to create a new sphere here. I'm just going to drag it over to here, and we're just going to make this function as our checkpoint. So we can see it's, at the moment, it's a solid sphere, because when you first create a basic 3D object within Unity, it adds a solid collider to it. So for example, if I was to play the game here and go run into it, we can see we can walk towards it, but it'll just push us out of the way. So that's no good for us. That's not what we want to happen, obviously. So we're going to go over to our sphere collider. As long as we have our sphere still highlighted, we're going to go over here and we're going to turn is trigger to true so that we can walk through it. And then we're going to rename our sphere to checkpoint. And the next thing we need to do is make it a different color so we can make it stand out a little bit. So we're going to go to our materials folder and add a new material. Create a material, there we go, and we'll call this checkpoint. And I'm just going to change the color of this. We'll just make it red to make it stand out for now. I'm going to click and drag that onto the sphere if it'll let me. It won't let me for some reason. It's okay, I'll just drag it onto checkpoint here. There we go. And to make it stand out a little bit more as well, we're going to make it see-through. Now, how you would normally make a color see-through within Unity for any sprites or anything like that is to pull the alpha value down. The alpha controls how much transparency you have. But you can see as I drag this left and right, it's not changing our material over here. So what we need to do is, I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle, that's fine. And what you do is, instead of sending rendering mode here to opaque, which it is by default, we're going to change it to transparent. So then it handles transparency. So now we can have our little checkpoint here and we can make our player run through it. So if we go play the game again, we can just run through it, and you can see if we're standing in the middle of it, we can still kind of see things behind it and stuff like that. Now obviously this isn't really an object you'd want to use as a checkpoint in your actual game. It's kind of, we're just using it as a placeholder for now, but it does exactly what we want it to do. So we have our little checkpoint here now. So let's set up some basic stuff to be able to handle it. Now obviously we're going to need a checkpoint script for us to be able to use. So I'm going to create a new C# script that we'll call checkpoint. And we're going to open that up in Visual Studio. Just have to reload our solution here. And then I'm also going to open up our health manager, because our health manager is what controls where we respawn. So at the moment, if we scroll down here, we have our respawn here. And what happens when we die is we go run our respawn cover team, we wait a certain amount of time, and eventually we reset the player back to the respawn point. So what we need to do to be able to use our checkpoints is basically have it so that when our player runs into a checkpoint, it will change this respawn point value to set it to whatever position the checkpoint is within the world. So if we want to change this respawn point position, we're going to need a function to be able to do that. So we'll go down here, down below where we have our heal player. We're going to create a new public void that we will call, I suppose, set spawn point. Probably makes the most sense. Like so. So we have a little function there, and we know that we want to set our checkpoint to be a new position within the world, and every position in the world, much like this respawn point is a vector tree value. It has an x, y, and a z value, as we've discussed before. So we need to pass into this function a new vector tree value, and what the value we will pass in will be whatever checkpoint position is within the world. But we're just going to call this here vector tree, and we'll just call it new position. So whatever x, y, and z value we pass in here will now be called new position according to this script. So in here we can say our respawn point, whatever it currently is set as, which is by default wherever we start within the world. We're instead going to say respawn point equals new position. And that's perfect. So that will do what we wanted to do, but of course, at the moment, there's nothing to tell that respawn point to do anything. So we're going to have to write some code in our new checkpoint script that will handle that. So we have our checkpoint script opened up here. We're going to need a reference to that health manager, because if we want to call this script, we're going to need to be able to access the script itself within the world. So we're going to create a reference here, public health manager. We'll just call it the health man. Nice and straightforward. And then in our start function, we want to make sure that we find that health manager within the world. Now you could, if I go back in here, actually we'll make sure we attach our checkpoint script to our checkpoint object here. If I just quickly save this for a second, we go back to Unity. Now what you could do, of course, is within this world, within every level that you do, you could make sure that every checkpoint that you place, you click and drag our health manager, which is on our player, I believe, isn't it? No, it's on our game manager. Yeah, so you could click and drag your game manager onto our checkpoint like this, and it would get the health manager script that's attached to it, and that would be fine and dandy. But what we want to do is set it up so that it will do that for us. So we'll of course use the health manager equals find object of type health manager, like so. So that'll automatically find it for us, so we don't have to worry about setting that every single time we add a new checkpoint into the game. Okay, so we have our health manager found, and the basic thing we need this script to do is detect when the player runs into it, and then as soon as the player runs into it, set the player's respawn point to be wherever this checkpoint currently is. So we can just say, we can create a new private void on trigger enter, and then that'll you see we get an autofill in Visual Studio here for on trigger enter bracket collider other. So whatever collider comes into our trigger area, what we want to do is check and see if that other collider that just arrived has the tag other.tag equals player. Now we've done that check before to see if we are finding the player, and this is the most straightforward and kind of simple way, that the most kind of apparent way to do this check. But we can do it a slightly different way, so I'm just going to remove this little stuff here for a second, and instead of just saying other.tag and then our two equal signs and then the player, a slightly minorly more efficient way is to use other.tag dot equals. So dot equals is something built into the string category. So this tag is a string value because it's just a collection of letters strung together. And this equals function is built into that, and it's a quick way of being able to check if the tag that we have here is equal to another string value. So this string value is the player one, like that. So we just type in our two brackets to close this one that we opened and this one that we opened, and then we put some curly brackets in. So as I say, it doesn't really matter too much if you use the other.tag and then two equal signs and then player, or use this. It's slightly more efficient to use this, but it's not too much of a problem either way. But so we have, we now know that a player has entered the trigger area. So the next thing we'll do is get our health manager that we already have found up here, and we'll say on the health manager, we want to set our new spawn point. So set spawn point, and then in brackets, we want to say our new spawn point should be at the current position of this checkpoint. So we'll save this, go back in here, let that compile for just a second, and then once it's compiled, if we hit play, we'll see first of all on our checkpoint script, if I just hit escape here, on the health manager over here we can see the game manager has automatically been found. And now if I hit this checkpoint first of all and then run and get myself killed, which for some reason I wasn't there for a second, and we respawn, and you can see we respawn back at the checkpoint. So perfect, that's exactly what we wanted to do. Let's go ahead, if we stop that for a second there, if we duplicate this checkpoint now and I'm going to put one, say here, and we'll put one up on top over here. And now if I hit play, if I run through that guy, we'll respawn right there. And if I go over here and run through this guy and die again, we'll respawn back over there. Perfect. Just the way we want it to. And we can do the same over here. But there's one problem with all this, and that is that at the moment when we hit a checkpoint, right now, we know that we've hit that checkpoint over here on the right. But these two checkpoints down here, we have no, there's not to distinguish this checkpoint from the other ones to say, oh, this one is hit, but these ones aren't. So we're gonna go ahead and make a nice simple little way that we can handle showing which checkpoints have been hit, which checkpoints have been hit, and which one is currently active, basically. So to do that, we're gonna go back to our materials, and I'm gonna change this checkpoint material. This one will now be checkpoint off, and we're gonna just duplicate it. Call this other duplicate checkpoint on, and we're just going to change the color to green, and we'll leave the same transparency on it. So we have two different materials now, and basically what we're going to do is whenever we hit a checkpoint, we're going to turn on our checkpoint on material, or we're going to change our material of the object to be the checkpoint on material, which will change its color in the world, and everything will be much nicer with that. So to be able to change the material, what we'll need to access is what stores the material on the object. So we have our checkpoint. On our checkpoint, what stores the material is the mesh renderer, or what we can do in a more generic way is just refer to the renderer of the object. And you can see here we have materials, and that's what is currently set to checkpoint off here. So in our script, what we'll do is just say public renderer. We'll just call it the rend, like that. So that'll allow us to access the renderer that's attached to our object once we hook it up within Unity. And then we're going to need a reference to the two materials that we want to use. We have our public material for checkpoint off and public material, material for checkpoint on. Oop, like that. Okay, so let's just hook them up first of all back in Unity. So we'll let that compile, and we see we have our empty slots. So we're just going to drag our renderer here down into the renderer slot, and then here we'll drag checkpoint off in there and checkpoint on in there. So let's just start off by making sure that when we hit a checkpoint, it turns on and it turns to the green color. So to do that, we'll just create a simple little method here that we're going to call public void checkpoint on, like so. Oh, that should be a closed bracket there. Just tidy this up. Sometimes it kind of auto completes things a little bit wonky, and when you press a key just off, you can kind of end up with some code that you didn't want, but that's okay. It's all fixed up there now. So we have our checkpoint on. So basically all we need to do here is say on the renderer, so the rend dot material equals CP on. So whenever we basically just access the material that's currently on the renderer and change it to be whatever our CP on material is here. So to make sure that this gets called, we're going to call this whenever our health manager's spawn point is set. So just after that, we're going to say, okay, after that, call the checkpoint on function and run that so that we turn our character to be, our checkpoint to be the right color. So if we hit play now, you can see if we run into this guy, oh, the other ones, sorry. We set up the color on our original checkpoint, but not on the other two. So I'm just going to delete those two checkpoints, and we'll just duplicate this one again and put them roughly around there. It doesn't really matter too much. So we hit play again. Now they should have all their materials assigned. So we run into that guy, he turns green. This guy also turns green, and so does this guy. But of course, that's not very much useful for us, because now we're in the exact same position like we were when they were all red, and now they're all just green. So that's no more useful to us, but it is showing that we're having an interaction. So it's giving some feedback to the player. So if we want to have this situation to turn the checkpoints on, we might as well also have a situation to turn them off. So a public void checkpoint off, like so. And we'll do the exact same thing as we did here with our renderer. We set that above, we set it to checkpoint on, but now we're going to set it to checkpoint off, like so. So we have this function to turn our checkpoint off, so it'll switch it back to its red color, but we don't have a situation where we want that to be called. And if we go back into the game and think about it logically, basically what we want to do is whenever we hit one checkpoint, so say if we hit this guy here, we want to find the other objects within the scene and make sure that all of them are currently set to checkpoint off. So what we can do is find every checkpoint object within the world and turn them all off, so turn them all back to their red color. And then once we've found them all and turned them all red, then we can turn this one to green. So then we know that if all of them are turned to red and then our specific one is turned to green, then we know that all the rest of them will be shifting to the right color at the right time. So if we go back in here, we want to do this within our checkpoint on script. And we want to do it before we turn whatever current checkpoint we hit, before we turn that one on. So we're just going to move that down a little bit. And then up here, what we're going to use is a thing called an array. And if you haven't encountered arrays before, I don't think we've used them yet in this series. Arrays are essentially like a list of objects within Unity. Lists, there's a specific thing called lists, which are sort of variations on arrays. But for all intents and purposes, arrays are like a list of objects. Nice and simple, nice and straightforward. So how we can visualize them within Unity, if we go up here, we're going to create a new array. And how we create an array is we say public so that we can see it. We decide what kind of array we want it to be. Well, we know that we want to create a list of all the checkpoints in the world at the moment. So public checkpoint. And how we make it an array, we just type two little square brackets like that, which means it's an array of checkpoints. So a public checkpoint array that we'll just call for now. We'll just call it checkpoints, like so. So we'll save this and we'll go back into Unity, and now we'll see over here a little checkpoints array appears here, and you see it's an array because it has a little arrow beside it, and you can hit down on the arrow and we can make this array as long as we want it to be. We could make it 55 long, or we could make it 2 long, however you want it to be. But we don't want to actually make this a public thing that we can access at all. I'm just going to cut this little section out, and I'm going to erase the public bit. We don't want that to be something we see within the world. One thing about arrays is once you create an array of a particular size, it's not very easy to change the length of that array. It's something that's doable, but it's not really worth your time having to manage that array based on how many checkpoints are within the scene within the world. What we're going to do instead is say whenever we check for checkpoints, we're going to create a new array. So down here, I'm going to paste back in our checkpoints that we created. Now we don't have to make it public because this is just a temporary variable that we're using within this function. It'll be created at this point in time when we check all the other checkpoints, and then it'll be discarded. We won't need to worry about it anymore. So we created this array of checkpoints that we call, or an array of checkpoints that we called checkpoints, and we need to make sure we set that to be equal to find objects of type and then checkpoint. We put our open and close brackets there like that. So our find objects of type checkpoint, much like we did up here for our health manager where we did find object of type, down here with find objects with a little s in the middle, that will find any objects within the world that have the checkpoint script attached to it that are currently active in the scene. So what this does is it returns an array of checkpoints. So we set this array that we're just creating here to be equal to whatever this array is. So however many checkpoints you set up in your scene, this will automatically make that array the correct length. And then within that array, we do a thing called a for each loop. So a for each loop is basically, we'll write it out and go through the English reading of it to understand the logic behind it. So we say for each. So basically what we're saying, for each object within a certain list of objects is how we're going to handle this. So we're saying for each checkpoint type of variable within for each checkpoint type of variable that we'll give a specific name, we'll just call it CP. So for each checkpoint in the checkpoints list, or checkpoints array, sorry, the checkpoints array that we just created right here. So for each checkpoint that we'll specifically call CP within this loop, within the checkpoints array, do something inside these curly brackets. So basically what we're saying is, if we imagine our array of, say, 5 objects, so we'll just write it here for a second. We have CP1, CP2, CP3, CP4, CP5, like so. Just line these up. So basically what we're saying is, the first checkpoint in the array, we're going to call that CP within this loop. So within this loop here, we say, on that checkpoint, call the function checkpoint off. And we put our open and close brackets like that. So that will call this function here, which will turn our render material to be off. So what happens is, we have this list of checkpoints, which is our checkpoints here. It goes to each one by one. So at the start here, it finds the first checkpoint, it refers to that as CP, and it goes, okay, that's CP, set its checkpoint to be off. That's fine, it gets to the end of the loop, and then what it does is it goes back up to the top, and as long as there's more checkpoints left for it to go through, as long as there's more space in the array, it'll go to the next one, it'll go, okay, turn that one off, then on the next one, turn that one off, and it'll keep going until it gets through each one of the checkpoints in the checkpoints array. So it's fairly simple. It's one you might not remember necessarily the words to use, but if you just look it up, if you search for each on Google, it'll tell you straight away and remind you as you go. So we'll just save this and we'll go back into Unity, let it compile, and now when I hit play, if we run into that one, it turns it to green. If we run into this one, it turns the red one back to green. If we run back forward, we can see we can switch between them all we want. If we run up here to this guy, you can see on our top screen that the other ones get turned to red, and perfect. Our checkpoints are working just the way we want them to. So there we go. That's how we can create checkpoints and link them together within Unity. Now, of course, what we did was set our material on our objects to be different types, but what you could equally do is switch on and off objects, so you could make it have a different checkpoint when you ran into it. You could make it instantiate an explosion effect when you ran into a checkpoint to dazzle the player of some kind. There's lots of different things you can do with that, but the concept there is right behind it. So we've got our checkpoints in place. The next thing we need to do is make sure we can actually tell our players how much health we have, because right now we might only have 1 health when we run into any of these cactuses. We're going to put that back up to something a bit more reasonable, and we want to be making sure that the player can see how much health they have.